So our next panel will be on cyber policy in action, bridging the gap between strategy and operations. We have Dr. Emily Goldman, strategist at US Cybercom, on detail to the National Security Council. We have Jay Healey, former cyber strategist at the Officer of the National Cyber Director, founding director of the Cyber Statecraft Initiative. This is a tongue twister, you guys. At the Atlantic Council. We have Rear Admiral retired Mark Montgomery, executive director of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. We have Harry Wingo, former deputy national cyber director, president of the DC Chamber of Commerce. And we have our moderator, Mr. James Oxford, cyber policy officer in the US government. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. As she said, my name is James Oxford. I currently work in cyber policy, but I've spent most of my career in cyber operations. And it's that transition from operations to policy that made me want to host this panel today. So I'm glad to be here. And I've lived that tension in operations and in policy of trying to make sure that policy enables the mission and doesn't hinder it. The second reason that I thought this panel was important is because we're facing a real threat in the PRC, and in my opinion, cyber policy needs to do more to help prepare for that threat. And so if we're serious about resilience, we have to have more conversations about bridging that gap between operations and strategy. So that's what this panel is about. I'm also a 2024 graduate of the College of Information and Cyberspace, go Ravens, and that experience helped change my mind about operations and strategy and policy, and it was really the catalyst that enabled this discussion today. So shout out to CIC. The panelists up here with me need no introduction, but their bios are behind me if you're not familiar. We're going to dive right in, so let's get started. The first question is about the panel theme, bridging policy and operations. So Dr. Goldman, how can cyber policy be crafted to effectively support operations without hindering agility? And what are the most important elements that policy must get right to enable both tactical and strategic outcomes?
Thank you, and am I on? Yeah, thank you for putting the panel together and for HammerCon for hosting this. It's really a pleasure to be here. I think if I was to give you a short answer, I'd say the most important thing that policymakers can do is to listen to the people in this room. Okay, because the people in this room and those of you that have operational experience and operate every day understand the nature of the cyber strategic environment. They understand the dynamics, the op tempo, its interconnected nature. And so if you look back at 2018, when there were a series of changes made that allowed more delegation of authority to execute cyberspace operations down to the Department of Defense, and when you looked at Congress declaring cyber as a traditional military activity, much of that was really informed by a conversation that began at the operational level and then went up to the policy and the strategic level. So I think that would be my biggest pitch, because my most important takeaway is that you can't impose a policy or a strategy on a problem or an environment. You have to derive it from it. You need to understand the nature of the space. You need to understand the continuous nature of operations, the flow back and forth between offense and defense, and most importantly, that cyberspace is really about what I call campaigning, right? It's about continuously operating, right? Our adversaries figured this out. They figured it out about a decade before we did. We're still in the process of figuring that out. There was a previous panel that talked about how do you measure the effects of cyber, and it talked about specific incidents or operations. I think we need to think much more holistically about where what you all do fits into the broader objectives of the US government and our allies and partners. So that would be my recommendation.
Awesome. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, it was great.
That was good. Second question on cyber force and workforce development. Mark and Harry, I'm coming to you. What are the key benefits and challenges of creating a separate cyber force? And how does that tie into efforts to scale, train, and sustain a skilled cyber workforce that meets both operational and policy objectives? I know, Mark, you've not thought at all about this.
Yeah, I'm glad for the third HammerCon in a row I can argue for better force generation model. But I'm going to start by talking about workforce development. I think one of the most interesting pieces of legislation we got up this year was not from, I mean, Marty and Josh are fantastic PSMs, but I actually think the most important piece of legislation is up in front of Homeland, and it's the Pivot Act. It's the idea of creating thousands of scholarships at community colleges and vocational schools where we pay for someone to get their certifications, not a 4-year degree, get their certifications or an associate's degree to very specific skill sets, and then they go work for state and local governments and utilities that qualify. So not like a utility owned by Berkshire Hathaway, but a utility owned by like Fred's Rural Collective number 27, and the people can get that training and come over. And then they owe 1 or 2 years, and what it is, give them the certification and then give them a skill, the experience. And I think we do those two things together, we're really going to start to address the workforce challenge. I love Scholarship for Service. I have a 25-year relationship with the program, and I want it to continue, which is going to be challenging with this administration, to be frank. In addition to that government, the federal government workforce getting those 4-year degrees, we 100% need to tackle the state and local, state and local governments and state and locally owned utilities that I think are critical parts of the infrastructure that allows for military mobility and economic productivity, but at the same time doesn't get any love from any government program. That's the number one thing I'd push. The number two, and that's for legislation. The second thing is for the executive branch, and that's the cyber force. We're done with Congress on the cyber force. They've done what they needed to do. It's now a presidential decision. And the president has an easy decision. Does he want to create an effective, agile force generation model, or does he want to stick with the status quo? Because the status quo is 12 years. If I hear one more time CSC 2.0, we're in CSC 12.0. Every year they would come to Josh, I don't know if he's still here, but he would suffer every year, them coming and going, here's our new model to fix readiness. Don't worry, give us another year, don't do anything. Next year, readiness is shitty. Here's our new model. Don't give us a year. So when they said CSC 2.0, I get a little frustrated because it's not that they're bad people. Cyber Command's not the problem. They have problems. They're not the problem. The force employment's not the problem. It's the force generation. And the last thing I'll get at, because I know I should get off the stage here, is I'll say that I'm absolutely comfortable recruiting fat, face-tattooed, weed-smoking kids to come into the cyber force. And I challenge you to find the U.S. Army Ranger recruiter who'll say the same thing. And the answer is none of them will say that. And since their job is to recruit infantry first, that's who we'll get. We'll get kids that are not in the 74% that are too unfit for uniformed service, but can run up and down a hill like nobody else's business. And the kid that can code Python in the corner is not going to get a good look. And I'm sorry, that's how our recruiting works right now. So we start with the wrong product. We then train it with 4 different service methodologies, which are not the same. We then try to maintain it with different pay bands and pay tricks. And I got to tell you, I worked with enlisted sailors for 35 years. They don't normally complain about the money they receive. The one time, and they're vastly underpaid. But if you want to piss off a sailor, tell him that the sailor next to him, who's been in just as long as him, has just the same skill sets, and who he thinks is probably a moron, is making $30,000 more than him. Now he'll come freaking unglued and leave the military, right? It's because, so that we have to have consistency across the services, and you can't do it because each service is using different tools to retain the people. So we need consistency across recruitment, training, development, and retention efforts. And the best way to do that is a singular cyber service that generates the forces and then gives them to Cyber Command so they can go out and kick ass as a cyber employment.
Harry.
So I think it's going to be important to have that type of force generation option. And so, Mark, thanks for all the work you've done on that. I would say what that could give you also is on skills-based hiring there is more, I would say, the opportunity for a campaign type of focus. And by that I mean 2027. In this room, and the great thing about MCPA is that this community understands that we are trying to fight tyranny. We're trying to discourage oligarchs and tyrants from making a miscalculation, and if they do make that miscalculation, to make sure that we prevail. And so for that, to have the type of flexibility and the ability for a workforce to be generated with that in mind, and take operational technology. Daryl, thank you for what you've said about airports, for example, and how you have the connection between utilities, telecom. But these are areas where 85% it's owned by the private sector. So how could workforce, skills-based, that means that if we change the policy, and as Emily said, to be aligned with what the times are, which is we're running out of time. And we have to make sure that this is laser focused on hiring the right people for the right roles. When I left college in the late 80s, my first job was driving an electric vehicle for work. It just happened to be underwater and in the dark. So the SOCOM model, and for Navy SEALs to be able to get that fourth generation that we needed, I think for cyber to have that capability now and to put it in the context of where whole of nation, we have industry able to be right there with the solutions, but also that spirit of collaboration, connectivity, and that's why I thank each of you for being here, because that's going to make all the difference on how we go after getting the right workforce and finding ways, whether it's in the service of the military, if it's in the service for civilian and contractors, or if you're going to companies. I think that alignment will be in a better spot with the policies that we have in place. It's just up to us to make sure that we push forward with it. So thank you.
It's like, oh, can I just?
Yes,
So
please.
just to be like a devil's advocate, or not really a devil's advocate, but so man, train, equip, readiness, recruitment, retention, critically important. I just want to make sure that we're clear about the problem we're solving for, right? And a clear definition of that problem. And I would offer that it's about having a military cyber enterprise that delivers enduring advantage in a period and is able to absorb and leverage rapid technology that is disrupting the way we operate and we fight. So it's not to say that there isn't one challenge, but the question is not to think that that's going to necessarily solve all of the challenge we might be facing. And if you look back historically at the United States, services developed for a particular reason. Combatant commands developed because the services couldn't figure out how to fight together, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we have a SOCOM-like model. The question I think to ask as well is to say, is there a cyber-specific something? Because this is a very distinct operating space. So, not saying that the solution won't be something that's already been discussed. I just think that people need to have that broader conversation.
Here's what I'd say first. We've been doing the other model for 12 years. It isn't like we've been doing the cyber service and it's not working. And we're not doing a SOCOM model. I don't mean you meant to say, I don't think you meant to say this, but let's be clear. Navy SEALs are trained by Navy SEALs at Navy Special Warfare Group alone. And I do not want any Navy SEALs training Air Force Special Operations, because those dudes are helo pilots, right? And Navy SEALs are not helo pilots. So it's a very different field. There's a uniqueness to the special operators that makes them very different than cyber. There is not that same uniqueness. And so I feel that, like, when I hear it, I know you didn't mean it in this way, but people throw the word SOCOM model around like it's magic. It's not magic to dudes like me. Dudes like me understand exactly why SOCOM gets what they want done, which is we throw a metric. By the way, see the CNO or the Chief Staff of the Air Force, it says no to a Navy SEAL or Ranger or Special Operations budget request. Doesn't happen. See the Navy CNO who actually gives the Navy cyber guys what they want. That never happens. It's the complete reverse budget. Cyber is not a priority to the services. Don't believe the bullshit their service chiefs say at congressional testimony. Oh, it's a top priority to me. Okay, rack and stack your, is it above submarines or below submarines? Below. Is it above strike fighter aircraft or below? Below. Is it above destroyers or below? Below. You know, you kind of go through things and you're friendly like, well, it's 10 or 11 out of 13. Yes, it's a top priority. I don't know. If I had 13 kids and you're my number 11 priority, I don't give a shit about you. I mean, Elon Musk kids know that only one kid counts. All right, I'm sorry. That's all right.
Jay, do you want to jump in?
I thought you were going to cut to me when you hit in the dark and underwater, but no.
I just want to clarify. I wasn't making a point about a SOCOM model. But I did want to say, Navy SEALs, we think we're awesome, but no, we're quiet professionals. What I would say is back to the bigger point of where cyber is at this point in history. So if you think of all the domains of warfare, of course, for land and then for naval power, because this 10 bull is at the center of the world and the Iberian Peninsula realized, and then you go, of course, to air power, cyber, absolutely. It's a point where, look at our connectivity, and this is another thing. We need as a nation to really understand that we have to claw back the networks. Look at the lead that the adversary has on who's buying the technologies. Harmony OS was mentioned earlier. If you look at all of those aspects, the best way to win, the best way to really shape the future is to build it. And whether that's in the private sector, with industry, and I think the telecom side is even more important. So I think having folks who understand that from the deepest level, what cyber means in all of its instances, that's something that requires us to have that flexibility to just build the forces and to work with industry. And let's not forget academia as well. James, you were amazing when you were at Fort McNair. I was impressed. And I just wanted to say those types of experiences matter. And cyber is so important for the world right now. So important.
You dragged me in on this one, Harry. So there was some great quotes that you reminded me of. And I remember it was from an Air Force 06, and he was saying, boy, we don't know what an information warrior was. And when we were doing what we were doing, we had to really decide what was going to be different about this role. That was Colonel Dusty Rhodes. He was a Nighthawk pilot. When he was setting up, Lieutenant Colonel back then, the very first combined offense-defense information warfare unit in direct support to the warfighter, the 609th Information Warfare Squadron, in 1996. So we are 29 years from combined offense-defense squadron doing cyber, like in exercises, going after the ATO, like those lessons were 96, 97. Right? So those airmen, those lieutenants are long retired by now. And we are still having a lot of the same questions. Well, what is a cyber warrior going to be? What is going to be distinct from them? We heard there's some great progress that's been made, right? But we are long into this, right? This wasn't 2010. This wasn't 2005. The folks that started are retired. By 1918, 15 years after we invented powered flight, we had basically figured out all the doctrinal Air Force missions and done almost all of them under a unified commander for a ground fighter in the Battle of San Miguel in 1918. That took us 15 years. We're 30 years in here, and we're still trying to figure out some very basic questions. So I do get a little bit of impatience in the, well, this is new, our future's ahead of us here. So it says the guy who wrote the military history book of the space, one of them. So.
Yeah, this is my fear. So we're 30 years in, right? Yes, it's not perfect, but I fear the cost, the overhead cost of standing up something new at this point, right? Do we really win if we eat that cost now? Do we win long term, or do we just figure out how to fix what we have?
Let's just wait till the Chinese attack, right? I mean, this is what I hear. The Chinese are close, Mark. We want to do. I mean, this is insane. Like, should we not build the next generation submarine because we're building the Virginia class and we're having the submarine threat's getting greater and greater? I don't accept that argument. If we can't transition I don't think there's anything that magic going on in cyber force generation. Remember, I'm not talking about changing cyber command. The force employment model stays the same. What you do is you transition over the cyber mission force to a cyber service. I don't think you're going to get a lot of pushback. I really don't. And then the other thing I do is I transition. I think this is one of the cool. I'm surprised, I should have brought this up originally. One of the most cool things about this is three things. One is you're going to get the reserve balance, the civilian uniform reserve balance better. Right now, if you go to a Navy squadron or a Navy ship, 99% of the people on board are in uniform and 1% are like civilians who fix like your Aegis radar, stuff like that. You go to an Army battalion, it's the same way. Air Force squadron's a little higher civilian, like 95.5. I think if you go to one of our cyber mission force teams right now, it's already 80-20 military civilian, and I think it should be 50-50. I think most of those guys should never leave, those men and women should never leave those jobs, just develop their, we're not sending them to like senior NCO training, junior NCO training. We're having them there kicking ass, having fun, doing what they do, going into the civilian service, coming back. I mean, when I say civilian, the private sector back. We'll get that right. The other two things are the Guard and the Reserve. We know there's incredible opportunity in the Guard and Reserve. The Guard, we're doing we're getting a D in our employment of the Guard, and the Reserve we're getting whatever's below an F.
Harry.
Jump in, and also another opportunity that we should consider as well is how we build the environment itself. So cyberspace is made by us. And so how can we, for artificial intelligence, for example, and yes, there's been a lot of talk about generative AI, that's great, but that's only part of what we're seeing. And so pushing forward and making sure that we maintain that leadership, that we do keep 2027 in mind. That's what Xi has said, that's the time to be ready to take Taiwan. To make sure that we're not just looking at IT AI, but how about operational technology? If you consider level 5 autonomy, so happens that's another part of the government, but it matters for the military as well. So what are we doing to make sure that we're allowing secured, trustworthy AI to actually be put in use, and to make sure that we are picking the right people to push forward on that. And we have such a strong history of that in the nation's history, and we are right there now. And so to the point of how long, you just made a good point about how long we've been at this, and drones, look at the lesson that Ukraine did on a strategic surprise event with a very specific type of operational technology. I had the chance to testify against DJI a couple years ago, so they hate me personally. But I think we need blue drones. We need to make sure that our supply chain for self-driving vehicles is accounting for what Beijing wants to come out of that. We need to make sure that maritime assets, so replicator, all of these issues that are coming up, that's the opportunity that we have also for cyber, and that's something we can win together on as well.
Thanks, Harry. I can tell you read my notes. The next question is about that strategic preparedness, adversaries, and emerging technologies. Jay, as we prepare for potential conflict with strategic adversaries like PRC, Russia, Iran, how should our policies evolve to integrate emerging technologies and ensure we're ready to compete and win in cyber?
Yeah, thanks. 3 quick points, and I think they're going to follow with Harry's there really well. Let me go back to the history for a second. For me, as I was looking at cyber conflict history, it seems to be at least as important about the brazenness by which each side acts rather than the technology. Right, I helped set up the JTF-C&D, one of the precursors of cyber coming back in 1998. You could, to me, cyber conflict goes back to 1988. You could take one of those folks and put them in a cyber conflict today, and they're going to pretty quickly understand the technology, and they're going to get caught up relatively quickly. Right? Yes, the technology has moved on incredibly from when they were looking at 2600 baud circuits. But to me, the dynamics of fighting through the domain have been relatively stable. Just like you could get a fighter pilot from 1918 and a fighter pilot today, give them a couple of beers because they're fighter pilots, and they're going to be doing this because flying, fighting, winning in the air has not changed that differently, even though we're now at speeds and at incredible speeds and distance. So to me, is a lot of the technologies aren't going to change, might not change as much as we think they might. Second lesson is some of them will. AI, we heard Lieutenant Colonel Lee, I love saying that, earlier in here. Some of them might. And some of those technologies may help the Department of Defense prevail in that conflict. Some of them may. They definitely can help us to lose. So I am much more focused on the defensive side of that and making sure that we're not opening up critical weaknesses in these technologies is to be far more important than making sure they improve the department's lethality. We've got lots of ways that we can reach out and touch folks. When he was DepSecDef, Hamry would push this a lot, and I feel like we've kind of gotten so enamored of the offense, we miss on that. Last, and this is to, I think also to Harry's point, is to tie back to American values, right? Something that we can do that none of our adversaries can is having an agile private sector that is able to take independent action, especially on the defense, right? If you're Iran, North Korea, Russia, you can't be making independent choices. It is unity of command. In the United States, we have unity of effort when it comes to defense. Our private sector, the agility, the subject matter expertise, one of the guys that I served with at JTF-C&D, Mark Sox, he went to Verizon. We can change cyberspace, he told me. We can bend it if we need to improve the defense. We can do that. That's really difficult for our adversaries. So I really want to see us take that model and really figure out where we can continue to do better on that unity of effort.
Dr. Goldman, you want to jump in? Harry?
I was just going to follow up on that point from history. Freedom's Forge, World War II. If you haven't seen that book by Herman, Freedom's Forge, it talks about, I call him the Great Dane, but Mr. Knudsen, who'd been at Ford and then General Motors. It was a lot harder to go from making automobiles to building ships to building airplanes than we should go back and look at the history. It took some hard work. And so what I think, that point about what we make, now we have cyber that's in that. We just need to make sure that we don't repeat the lessons of not being on a wartime footing as a nation, and that goes with our values as well. And that's about storytelling. That's where this community, each of you have a role to remind folks of why we're here. You all who know me know what I'm reaching for right now. So this is it right here. This is part of it. But aligning, making sure that our values through the ability for free enterprise and innovation, but there are certain things that only the government can do, but we have to rise to it.
So I'm just going to add, going back to your question about disruptive technologies, and what I would say is that all of these technologies have embedded in them algorithms and analytics, okay? Whether those, we know with the advent of machine learning and big data, that has gone on steroids. And so what I would put out there is that probably all of your organizations have a data strategy, you have a sensor strategy, probably a cloud strategy, everybody has an AI strategy. But there's not an enterprise understanding about the nature of this technology. And the fact that what I would argue is there's a competition to deploy these analytics rapidly into operational systems to have an impact, both defensive and offensive, right? And so this is what we call analytic superiority. And that is something that is pervasive in every warfighting domain, in every system, at every weapon system, at every echelon. And so I think that we need to have more of a strategic approach about where we decide to put those very precious analytic resources, where the types of data that we decide to acquire, and most importantly, how we rapidly operationalize that into systems. Because I can tell you right now that China has been doing this, and they have been practicing it, and they've been practicing it on their own competition for decades. So recognizing that obviously we have different values and different laws and norms, not saying change any of that. That's why we have to figure out how to do this, because it's not who gets AGI first. It's not who's got the best model. It's who's got a good enough one to embed it into either an offense or a defensive system to create an effect and to degrade the adversary's ability to do the same. So this is a different type of competition that I would put out there that I think is how we need to be thinking about this technology.
Guys, and I think we're in a lot of trouble, because I think you're absolutely right. And I spent a lot of time in Ukraine, and they do not have, they don't really have a procurement. There's some flaws to what I'm about to say. They don't have a traditional procurement system, would be the gentlest way to say that. But their ability to adapt, to do software engineering combat, to adapt software engineering, even some hardware, is phenomenal. And when I look at our ability to develop tools, develop both either hardware or software products, I think we're just, we are generationally slower than them. And that's going to be hard for us. And one thing I do want to say, we can learn. I've watched the Navy in surface warfare learn, like in the Red Sea, where when I was a junior officer, it was 2 to 3 years between Aegis tape updates. Then when I was a CO of a ship, it was about 1 year. When I commanded a carrier strike group, it was about every 3 months. For my son, it's about who's an ensign, it's about every 3 or 4 days. That's a system getting better. That we're winning a software engineering battle there. But that's a one-off thing where the Navy, was able to focus all their energy on it. I don't know that we're doing this across the spectrum of our war fighting in a way to compete. So I think you're absolutely right. Whoever gets that, even if we have the IP first in our country, because it can get stolen or jacked, I'm not sure we'll have the tool that you're talking about employed first. So I think your point's really strong, and we need to figure out how we take advantage of having the smartest entrepreneurs, making sure that produces the best product, the first good product to the market.
Emily, agree. I join Mark in saying absolutely. And one example I'd like to call out would be our telecom networks, but in the sense of wireless and how they connect up to analytic systems. I mentioned embedded AI, but if you look at the decision cycle, and we need to remember, moving 5G, 6G, our response to how much ground Huawei was able to gain in these systems and that world, you can just imagine the scale of the networks that are there and the speed at which things happen. And don't forget that if you look at our response to have like an ORAN, Open Radio Access Networks. So what that means, it's not a cure-all, because we've just opened up another battle space where the adversary will tend that open garden. And if we don't have the gardeners that are there for that, AI, these new wireless systems that are connecting all of these operational assets, they are AI native. And so we have to remember that having the procurement, the acquisition cycles, and using the advantage of the government doing that at scale, and having people who understand how that connects, and having the community that MCPA represents to have that connectivity, I think that's one of the most important ways that we can win that analytic battle. And I love the way that General Stanton put it this morning, that if you don't have gas for your tanks, you're not going to roll. And if you don't have the data, you can't fire. You don't even know if you're being fired on. And that is another reason why we have to build cyberspace.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to move into what we're calling the lightning round for Q&A. So if you're on LinkedIn, you've seen that I've been gathering questions over the past several weeks. So these questions are from maybe someone in the audience. The panelists have not seen these questions. We'll start with the first one. How should we think about cyber deterrence today? Has it been redefined by persistent engagement? And what's the path forward for meaningful norms and rules of engagement in cyberspace?
I defer to the doctor who's writing the book. So,
No, so I would, what I would say is that deterrence has a role in cyberspace in terms of deterring what we would consider events that have significant consequence, that are above the armed attack threshold or at that. The question is, how do we deal with the range of activity below that threshold? And that was the sense that in order to constrain that behavior, a reactive model of deterrence, of threatening to punish or afterward, and also by denial, was not effective and it wasn't working. And that was sort of the origins of how we developed persistent engagement. I got a bunch of people here that were there at the inception, so to speak. So what I would do is I view these as complementary strategies, right? So once again, you have to understand the problem you're trying to solve for and say what is the most relevant strategic approach to do that.
Is it time to consider something like a civil cyber organization similar to the Civil Air Patrol? Is this model better, a model that's better to engage private citizens in national cyber defense?
I'll take a first whack. I'll say, look, I'm going to say that we need a cyber force. If we have a cyber force, we'd have a cyber guard. If you have a cyber guard, you have a cyber reserve. That reserve can look like the cyber force, which is 50-50, I hope 50-50 civilian military, and then you can use them. And we know this, and we can use special rank. I think you guys saw the Army brought in 4 CTOs at the lieutenant colonel level. That was actually, I mean, I know Randy George, the head of the Army, had to remind him about this. That's actually a law we passed 8 years ago that allowed each of the services to go between 100 and 200 people each. All the services ignored it for like 4 years. The Army's taken it on slightly. I think we saw, didn't we have Rob here earlier? Rob Lee from Dragos, right? He's came in as, I think he came back as a lieutenant colonel. Either a major lieutenant colonel, is now lieutenant colonel. I think the rank's limited to lieutenant colonel, but you can bring reservists in this way. I also want this so that you can move back and forth. We're going to win if our civilians and our cyber force can move back and forth easily into the civilian world and back, get skill sets, come back, share skill sets. There's going to have to be clearance, there'll have to be polygraphs. I get that. We do that anyway at this point for just about everybody. You know, I think we can do this and we can win. So the answer is we're going to get better. I'm optimistic that we're going to get better at this. I think we'll do well. I think the services are embracing opportunity. We do this shit with doctors, right? They come in as like commanders, you know, all the time come in as like lieutenant commanders and commanders, you know, barely able to salute. I even think we do it with dentists at this point. I mean, we do this. We do it with chaplains. I mean, we can do it with cyber specialists. If you have a skill that we need and it's out there, we can make special. We're not going to make you a general, but you know, we can do everything short of that.
And I'm a little against the auxiliary model, you know, supporting everything that that Mark just said, because again, I think America's cyber power is not on Route 32, right? It's not Fort Meade. America's cyber power are the companies that are building cyberspace and conducting the defense, right? It's Google, it's Microsoft, it's CrowdStrike, it's Dragos. That's a lot of the front line right there. The military is good at shooting back. We're good at spying. We're good at protecting our own systems. Other than that, right, the U.S. military can't do that much compared to those companies. Sports analogy. Anywhere the ball is hit in cyberspace, it's going to be someone in the private sector that's close enough to make the play. They might not be able to see the ball. Well, we can help them with threat intelligence. They might not have the skills. We can help practice on that. They might have a glove. Good, we can work the capability development. They might be like me when I was in Little League. Forget they're in the game till they hear the crack of the bat. That's okay. We can help across all of those different areas, and I think an auxiliary moves us into, no, it has to be the government, and that's the prime actor, and I don't think that's where we get agility and subject matter expertise.
What competencies will tomorrow's cyber leaders need, especially as we integrate AI more deeply into operations and defense? Harry, you want to take that one?
Absolutely, leadership. And that's knowing what it takes to win, but also knowing what it takes to pull out of your team to inspire them. And leaders build other leaders, so I would say one of the most important is with domain expertise, leadership will prevail. It's critical.
I'd like to see a little more, and this is something that waxes and wanes in the General Officer Corps in general, over time, but we're going to need some risk-taking. I mean, I just think we're at that point now. I mean, I'm not saying everybody has to be Billy Mitchell, but we've got to be out there. We've got to stretch the boundaries on this. It's a new warfare area, not to the people in this room, but to the people in the tank. It's a new warfare area still. So we got to be able to take some. We got to be able to take some risk, and then the senior leaders have to not punish people for taking risk. We still have this. This applies to both our procurement, but also to our operations. We have to understand that we can't enter a zero-defect world with this, that we've got to allow people to take risks, experiment. The equivalent to what we do here in the civilian world, software startup companies, they have failure rates in the 50 to 70% range. We have failure rates in the 0.1 to 0.2% range. One of us is wrong, and I don't think it's them, right? Theirs is market-driven. Ours is policy, regimentation, discipline-driven. Ours, we need to loosen that up a little bit, allow for a little bit of failure. But I say this in the context of, Billy Mitchell was court-martialed, right? I mean, this is tough for us as an organization. But I think if if we do it in procurement first, if procurement begins to lead the way in this, and I think it might, we're going to see some opportunity to do that in other areas too. And I just think there'd be value in that.
I know we're running out of time, but for the sea service example, Winston Churchill, keeping it 5 eyes, the risk that he took when he was Lord of the Admiralty and said, we've got to switch from coal to oil. And so the equivalent of
I
that
thought you were
in
going to bring
cyber-
up Gallipoli, which was a gigantic
Well,
failure.
that's the failure thing. No.
And his
But actually-
invasion of Norway, which is a gigantic failure.
And
But
that's
then,
it. He kept failing.
and then he
failing,
won.
Failing.
He
and
failed
then he
up,
won.
yeah.
And he actually, yeah.
is
so
that thing going to
keeping
move
at it.
another 10 minutes again? Because it moved like 10 minutes earlier.
All right, well, thank you all for your participation, a really good conversation, and thank you everyone who submitted questions. I appreciate it.
So we have one last thing that we need to do, so we're asking everybody to just hold tight. Just a minute, please.
Don't leave. Everyone else can sit the hell down. Emily, we are going to present you with the Order of Thor medal. And so we'll take the photo and the hug, and then I won't say anything because we actually do the photo now. So some of you, many of you know Dr. Emily Goldman. I will tell you, I first met Emily, I think it was 2009 or 2010. And General Alexander came into the office, Emily was in tow, and said, TJ, I would like you to talk to Dr. Goldman and then come to me at the end of the day and tell me if we should hire her. And we sat down at the Commander's Action Group and had a conversation for a couple of hours. And it was a remarkable opportunity to recognize talent as a thinker, as a leader, as someone who cares about the nation, its security. Not an expert in cyberspace, but an expert in academia, an expert in international relations, an expert at organizations and how they can improve, and how through the pursuit of knowledge and rigor and analysis, they can arrive at decisions to be better, and then to never allow them to forget the basis for why the decisions were made, and to keep them true on the path to improvement. So Emily, Dr. G, I would say that you have been often unknown, but crazily well-published, well-thought, highly regarded. You've done service downtown, you've done service at Fort Meade, you've done it at the agency, you've done it at the command. You have been continuity for more than a decade, and yeah, Cybercom not perfect, but they're doing better today than they were, and in some measure, large in my mind, that's attributable to you. So thank you very much. You want to say anything now, or?
I'm like speechless.
Okay, that's okay to be speechless.
But you know, it's really because of working with people like you. I mean, no, I'm serious. So thank you. It's so nice to see that actually people do matter, right?
People matter. People matter.
So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.